Hi guys, here's the prep for our watercolor portraiture class that's going to focus on realism, and I'll send out the reference before class. But basically here I'm able to make smooth transitions because I'm using some really high GSM watercolor paper. This is Arches 840 GSM, so you don't even need to tape it down. I'm coming in with one wash using wet paint, and while the paint is working, I'm placing colors that I've pre-mixed next to one another so that they blend nicely into one another. One thing about the reference I've chosen is that there are strong shadows across the face, which helps as a realistic subject in watercolor painting because it creates strongly defined contours of the face. So the placement of where I'm putting down the paint is in part based on the planes of the face. And because we'll be testing these watercolors out beforehand, I'm also aware that they're going to dry a bit lighter than what I'm putting down. So even if it seems really intense coming down at first, they'll dry a little bit lighter. I'm using clean water when I need to blend into certain areas, and I'm also using a bit of paper towel to pick up the paint if things are getting a little too saturated or the color is not exactly what I want. For finer details, I'm allowing the paint to dry a little bit before coming in with my brush. So I'm using blue here as a way of differentiating lighter values which are in the slightly cooler area, so slightly in shadow. So the value, the actual intensity of color is not necessarily different, but the color is different, which will create the impression of realism. And I'm paying careful attention to the nose. We'll go over this in class because the little highlights on the nose sits on two planes of the face. So detail in the nose can tell us a lot about the face. And then moving into the eyes, so I haven't done this just yet in this demo, we'll come to it. But the whites of the eyes are actually going to be more of a greenish color. Our understanding of color is really based on what colors are placed next to one another. So oddly enough, even though I'm painting in the whites of the eyes as green, once this is complete, they're going to read as white. Probably overdone the eyebrows a little bit here. Because the paper I'm using is such high GSM, I'm able to get away with a lot of layers. When you're working with lower GSM paper, part of the challenge is simply predicting what the colors are going to dry as. So I can afford to be a little bit cautious when I'm using higher GSM paper because it's not going to just disintegrate if I have to add layers to create richer color. And this makes it really good for beginners and also for more realistic paintings, but unfortunately it is very expensive. So a whole A1 sheet of this is around 50 pounds, so it's a lot. So I'm working quite small here, but I would recommend just playing around with higher GSM paper if you can, just to give a sense of the possibilities, because it really, the paint, absorbs into it beautifully. It's a pleasure to work with, and you can get away with a lot. Just adding in some depth of shadow, and again in class we'll go over this a lot more slowly with more detail, and before class I'll send out the reference on a grid. So in total this took about 2 hours. Could take a little bit less with less sort of fiddling around, and we'll go over all of these aspects in class.